MSNBC senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin is outside the courthouse. Also with us, former U.S. Attorney Greg Brower and MSNBC legal analyst Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, a civil rights attorney and former prosecutor. Lisa, this hearing began about an hour ago. Bring us up to speed.
Anna, from what we understand, oral argument is still ongoing in the courtroom. The courthouse behind me for the Eastern District of Virginia. That's where a South Carolinian judge, Cameron McGowan Curry, has been tasked by the Chief Judge of the Fourth Circuit with hearing arguments as to the illegality of the appointment of Lindsay Halligan as interim U.S. attorney. We understand from a producer that was inside the courtroom that arguments are they've been really focused on the defense side so far, that for Lindsay Halligan, the argument is being led by Henry Whitaker. And I want to just say a little bit about Mr. Whitaker's background, because he is a new figure to both of these cases. Henry Whitaker is the former Solicitor General of Florida. He works at Main Justice as a counselor to the Attorney General, and he was not until very recently affiliated with either of these cases. But most importantly, a counselor to the Attorney General is usually somebody who gives advice to the Attorney General, as the title would suggest, not someone who's on the front lines of cases arguing oral argument in a district court or even an appellate court. Those are usually people who are staffing senior leadership positions. And so the fact that Henry Whitaker himself is arguing this today bespeaks yet an ongoing problem in both of these cases for Lindsay Halligan, that irrespective of whether or not she was lawfully appointed, she has had a dickens of a time finding people to litigate these cases. In one of the cases, she's relying on two prosecutors from North Carolina, and another case, she's relying on a prosecutor from the Eastern District of Missouri. None of these people are from anywhere near here. So, Anna, as soon as we have more color from the courtroom, we will bring that to you.
Greg, your thoughts on that detail? How tough is it for a federal prosecutor that doesn't have any background in a case to just walk in and pick it up?
Well, it is challenging, Anna, and I think it also speaks to the fact that while in normal times, in virtually any type of normal case, any Department of Justice lawyer, any assistant U.S. attorney from around the country could competently argue that case once they got up to speed on the law and the facts. But here, with a few cases, it seems that DOJ is having a hard time finding lawyers within the department who are willing to argue the issues in the case. And perhaps they're having a hard time finding lawyers that they trust to follow exactly what department leadership wants to be done in these cases. I think that speaks loudly to the underlying problems with these cases that are being argued in court in Virginia today.
Kristen, the other thing that seems unusual here is this isn't the judge overseeing the Letitia James case or the James Comey case. It is a third judge now involved in all of this, Judge Cameron Curry, who's based in South Carolina. How did she wind up involved?
Well, I think that's a deliberate move to preserve the integrity and really also the appearance of integrity of this whole process. You know, judges in the Eastern District of Virginia actually do play a direct role in filling vacancies for the U.S. attorney. And under federal law, once an interim appointment expires after that 120 days, those same judges can actually vote to install a replacement until a permanent nominee is confirmed. Why is that important? Well, because that's one of the core legal issues that is being discussed here, whereas the defense is saying Halligan was not appropriately appointed, and they're making the unlawful appointment argument. And the prosecutors are saying, no, we do have the power to do this through successive appointments. This is why the South Carolina judge gets involved, because technically the Eastern District judges could have voted to install that replacement. So that's why this is really important, because really what it does is say, let's take politics, geography, and personalities off the table. Let's look at this. Let's protect the public confidence. Let's make this about the legitimacy of the prosecutor in and of itself.
Lisa, we know both James Comey and Letitia James attorneys are saying that Halligan should not be interim attorney because that 120-day interim term ran out with her predecessor, and so they can't go back-to-back with interim attorneys. Attorney General Pam Bondi then came in after all this, gave her a new title, and so now Lindsay Halligan is a special attorney to the Justice Department assigned to oversee the Comey and James cases. How might that factor into how the judge rules here?
I don't think very much at all. I mean, Pam Bondi's sort of ex post actions to ratify Lindsay Halligan with additional titles or to delegate authority to her as a special U.S. attorney doesn't impact, Anna, what happened at the moment of indictment. It's indisputable that at the moment of indictment, Lindsay Halligan was the only person acting as interim U.S. attorney, and that was the only title she had at that moment. When she then signed the indictment, she was the only person to sign it. And again, only with that title. So Judge Curry today has to assess whether at the time of indictment, Lindsay Halligan was lawfully appointed such that she could indict James Comey and Tish James by herself. Again, an order signed by Attorney General Pam Bondi on the 31st of October, well after both parties were indicted, probably doesn't have any legal impact, although the attempt is to shore her up in the event that she gets to stay on this case, Anna.
So, Greg, if Halligan remains on these cases under this special title provided by Bondi, is that the end of the road in terms of challenges to her in this office? Would she be here to stay?
Likely for practical purposes, although there may be appellate rights that the defendants in these cases would have. But they also have, as you know, other arguments that are pending by way of motions with the judge, motions to dismiss, for example, for vindictive prosecution. So this, I would submit, this challenge to Halligan's status is the most procedural of the motions that are now pending. There are much more substantive motions that pose bigger problems for the government's cases in both the Comey case and the James case, potentially.
So, Krista, Greg lays out there are layers and other motions to dismiss that would still be viable if Halligan wins this round one. But if a judge rules against Halligan's appointment here, what does it mean for either case or both?
Well, if the judge agrees that Halligan's appointment was unlawful, then basically both indictments will go down. But keep in mind, the DOJ is most likely going to appeal immediately, and that's automatic. The cases will then freeze, and the appellate court will, weigh in. But if the cases are dismissed, the DOJ really could refile as well, but only if the statute of limitations hasn't expired. And this is where it gets really tricky. Because for Letitia James, that's not really a problem because the bank fraud really carries that statute of limitations of 10 years. But if the indictment falls for Comey, his carry a 5-year statute of limitations, which technically would have already run out. Now, there are some exceptions to that. There is a tolling of it for 6 months if they're able to make certain indicia of proof. But again, if the motions are denied, the defense is going to appeal early. But again, that's a long shot.
And Lisa, there are other U.S. attorneys, interim or acting U.S. attorneys who have been appointed by this president who have also seen their roles challenged. Alina Habba in New Jersey, Sigal Chattah in Nevada are just a couple of them. Does what happened in this case have any impact on those or vice versa?
No, not really. I mean, I will say that if the Third Circuit were to rule on Alina Habba's appeal of the district court decision invalidating her appointment, that could be influential. But none of these cases have direct precedential effect on the others. And of course, Anna, there's a factor here that doesn't exist in any of those other cases, which is that Lindsay Halligan herself signed these 2 indictments. That is not the case with any of the other 3 U.S. attorneys on who courts have already ruled. And I should also mention Tish James is challenging the validity of the appointment of a 5th U.S. attorney, John Sarcone, in Albany, New York. She's basically saying that subpoenas that he served to the New York Office of Attorney General are invalid because Sarcone, like all of the people we were just talking about, was invalidly appointed to his role as interim U.S. attorney.
Lisa, do we have a sense of how quickly we could get a ruling here?
We don't, but of course, time is of the essence, Anna, because all of the other motions that Greg was previewing, including the motions for selective and vindictive prosecution by both Jim Comey and Tish James, are going to be heard and briefed rather quickly. So you would think that if the judge here is going to dismiss, she might want to do it quickly in order to relieve the parties of the burden of continuing to brief on those motions and having to pay, of course, defense costs. That's something that rests very heavily sometimes on district court judges, which is like every day that I am not making a decision here has consequences for the parties before me, both the government and the defendants. I expect that Judge Curry will rule fairly quickly, but I don't expect that she's going to rule from the bench today. She could, of course, surprise us all, but hopefully we'll hear from her in some time of a matter of weeks, not months.
Greg, what do you see as the stakes here? How much is this going to matter, not just for these two cases, but really when we talk about the rule of law and the democratic system in terms of the credibility of the judicial system?
Well, the stakes are high, and I would submit that so far DOJ has had a problem. As was mentioned earlier, a series of appointments have been challenged successfully in Nevada, in New Jersey, in Los Angeles. And so this is the latest. Each one has a little bit of a different twist in terms of the specific circumstances surrounding the appointments. But so far, what judges have said is the department has embarked upon a very unorthodox and indeed unlawful way of installing acting U.S. attorneys. And so that doesn't speak well to the overall administration of justice right now and the way DOJ is prosecuting cases and who they're appointing. And so to continue to lose these legal battles with respect to their appointments, I think does pose certain challenges for DOJ.
Greg Rauer, Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, thanks so much for the analysis. Lisa, stay on top of what's happening, and thank you for giving us the updates.